Welcome to our channel. There are things Hollywood absolutely doesn't want you to know. On the surface, the American entertainment world is always painted with bright stage lights, glamorous outfits, and perfumes so alluring they seem straight out of an advertisement. But behind the scenes, beyond those dazzling spotlights, lies a truth so pungent and unbearable that even those involved hesitate to face it. Many famous black artists' icons, once worshipped as gods during the golden age of music and cinema, actually lived lives completely different from what was shown on stage. Not one or two, but a list of 19 famous names, including singers, actors, and genius musicians. They always appear in public looking polished and well-groomed from head to toe. But behind the scenes, the truth is many of them don't bathe weekly, wear the same stinky clothes, and have body odors so strong that it leaves the entire set in a state of heat shock. These stories aren't just rumors or nonsense, but confessions from those who worked and lived alongside them, backstage staff dancers, musicians, sound and lighting technicians. And once you know, you might never look at them the same way again. If you find this story interesting, don't hesitate to leave a comment with the number 1 and share your thoughts with us. Join us on this journey to uncover untold secrets, and make sure to hit like and subscribe so you won't miss the next exciting videos. Let's create a community that seeks the truth and explores every hidden corner of the entertainment world. James Brown, the blazing icon of 1960s soul music, set stages on fire with his powerful voice and whirlwind performances, especially at the legendary Apollo Theater. But beyond that fiery energy, James Brown was also famous in a very different way. His sweat smell would send both the band and the backstage crew into a panic. Close associates reveal that Brown rarely changed his performance suit, even though it was soaked with sweat from multiple back-to-back shows. During some intense tours traveling from New York to Chicago, he would still wear the same heavy damp suit as if it had been dunked in water. The backstage crew always had to carry heavy-duty deodorant sprays just to make the air breathable whenever he appeared. The peak of the smelly legend occurred in June 1965 during a performance in Atlanta. A sound technician nearly fainted while standing near Brown to adjust the microphone. He recounted that it wasn't just the usual body odor, it was a haunting mixture of strong body odor and overpowering perfume that Brown tried to use to mask it, making no one daring to get close. What's worse, James Brown wasn't ashamed at all. On the contrary, he was proud of his sweat. He declared that it was the soul of his being, proof of the passion and intensity he poured into his performances on stage. He would laugh loudly whenever someone mentioned the idea of showering, claiming, "My sweat is a symbol. It's indispensable." The story became so well known in the industry that people began referring to it as the James Brown effect, both inspiring and making others take a step back. Each time they prepared for a tour, the technical crew, lighting team, and wardrobe department had to prepare not just professionally, but mentally to endure that distinct smell. Gradually, the sweat and the damp suit became inseparable from James Brown, a part of the music legend that no one dared to confront directly. People whispered about it like a dark secret, but James Brown never cared. Perhaps it was because no one had the courage to make him change. Cab Calloway, the shining star of the jazz era in the 1930s, was a living icon at the Cotton Club in Harlem, known for his distinctive raspy voice and luxurious silver-like suits. But behind the stage lights and dazzling smiles lay an unpleasant secret. According to the dancers and crew, Calloway disliked showering. Instead, he used expensive perfumes as a weapon to combat his body odor. The blend of lavender and musk perfume became almost like Calloway's signature scent. But the harsh truth was that no matter how much perfume he used, the body odor from days without showering could not be masked. The classic story took place on an October night in 1937 during a 3-hour performance in Chicago. The weather was cool as fall had set in, but the entire crew still struggled with the assault from the overpowering mix of perfume and body odor. A young dancer whispered, "Cab smells like a perfume shop on fire." Calloway couldn't care less. When someone complained, he would simply chuckle, shrug, and say, "This is my style. If you can't handle it, don't step on stage with me." He even carried a bottle of perfume in his jacket pocket as a constant companion, ready to spray more whenever anyone voiced their concerns. But the body odor remained more persistent than any fragrance. For those meeting him for the first time, it was truly a shock. It revealed a very human, very real side of Cab Calloway, in stark contrast to the glamorous public image. That peculiar scent became a part of showbiz legend, a secret few dared to speak of. But it was also what created his unique essence, that cab quality no one could ever imitate. The legendary Bo Diddley created the signature rhythm for rock and roll, a force that shook American pop culture in the 1950s. With his iconic guitar and relentless touring, he became an irreplaceable pioneer. But behind the glory, there was a truth that only insiders dared to speak. Bo smelled terrible. During the exhausting 1958 tour through the South, Bo Diddley often went for an entire week without showering. His reason: water messes with the rhythm in my body. As a result, the stench of his sweat, the cigarette smoke he inhaled all day, and the thick leather jacket soaked in odor created an unbearable, suffocating atmosphere. On the tour bus, the windows were always wide open, even when the cold November air cut through like a knife. The band members tried to sit by the windows to get some fresh air, while Bo sat in the middle of the bus, as if nothing was wrong, even sneering and saying, "This is the smell of the blues, the smell of a real person." Anyone who wanted to play with him had to take it. Even the fans weren't spared. One time in Memphis, Bo Diddley's week-long lack of showering might have sounded uncomfortable and unbelievable, but in reality, it was living proof of his stubborn, rebellious character. He couldn't care less about outward perfection or societal standards like personal hygiene. For Bo, the raw, vibrant energy of rock was what truly mattered, and his body odor, that honest man's smell, was like a badge of honor, a defiant rejection of superficial standards, and a deeply personal, unforgettable signature. Today, when people talk about Bo Diddley, they don't just remember the stage-shaking rhythms, they remember a symbol of someone who lived unapologetically as himself, never asking for approval or making excuses for his differences, no matter how intense those differences might have been. Howlin Wolf, the blues legend with a thunderous, growling voice, moved millions of hearts in the 1960s. His music didn't just light up the stage, it left a deep mark on the history of blues, making him an irreplaceable icon. But behind that fierce exterior lay a truth no one wanted to talk about. His body odor was so bad it literally made people run away. In 1964, during an interview in Chicago with Rolling Stone magazine, a reporter had a horrifying experience just sitting near Howlin Wolf. The moment he let out a booming laugh or began to sing, a storm of odor hit the stench of cheap cigarettes, sweat soaked into his skin from endless performances, and the heavy scent of bourbon from the night before. The air grew thick and suffocating, causing the reporter to cough repeatedly and lose focus. It was nearly impossible to get any deep answers from a blues legend when his body odor was strong enough to leave the interviewer dazed. But what's most striking is that Howlin Wolf didn't care one bit. He saw it as an inseparable part of authentic blues music, and once boldly declared, "If you want to hear real blues, you've got to smell real blues." A line that captured the raw, unvarnished artistic spirit he lived by, symbolized by the sweat-soaked crumpled shirt he always wore on stage, a treasure steeped in the past, and soul of Mississippi marked by pain, grit, and survival, so potent, in fact, that at a small southern bar, the smell of his sweat and cigarettes once overwhelmed the front row so much they asked to move farther back, not out of fear, but because they simply couldn't take the thick, heavy air. But Wolf didn't care. To him, it was his signature, the kind of blues spirit that couldn't be copied. His scent wasn't just body odor, it was the smell of a life poured into every note through sweat, blood, and tears. These stories aren't meant to tear down a legend. On the contrary, they deepen our understanding of true art, that the price of authenticity, rawness, and refusal to compromise is sometimes anything but pleasant. Sly Stone. The frontman of the legendary funk band Sly and the Family Stone was a vivid embodiment of freedom and musical explosion in the 70s. He didn't just create earth-shaking funk anthems, he lived a truly wild life of non-stop creativity, all-night parties, and of course very few showers, and when there's a riot going on dropped in 1971, the world hailed him as a creative genius. But behind the scenes was a secret that made anyone who heard it sigh. He could go weeks without bathing, lost in a haze of songwriting, smoke, booze, and music. His body odor was compared to a biological weapon that drove people away. In 1972, during a show in San Francisco, the thick mix of sweat, cigarette smoke, and old hair grease was so overwhelming that the dancers had to back up several feet. It wasn't fear that drove them back, but the sheer inability to breathe in the thick air of Sly's signature funk. A crew member once joked, "Sly is like a forgotten hippie festival," a line that perfectly captured his wild, free-spirited, and unapologetically pungent lifestyle. But Sly Stone never saw it as a problem. He once said, "That smell is the rhythm of freedom. Only those who truly get funk can feel it." A veteran music producer who once worked with Sly had to bring an essential oil diffuser into the studio just to balance the air, a clear sign that Sly's smell had gone beyond personal hygiene. It had become a real challenge to the working environment. But behind that body odor were endless hours of jamming, sleepless nights filled with booming bass and a creative soul no one could replicate. Sly Stone didn't smell like flowers. He smelled like a funk tornado, wild, overwhelming, and intoxicating like an addictive drug. Muddy Waters, the father of Chicago blues, not only created soul-stirring melodies that moved millions in the 1950s, but lived and breathed music itself, embodying raw authenticity without pretense. Yet behind that iconic musical image was a habit that made people both chuckle and cringe during tours through southern bars. Muddy often skipped bathing altogether, pouring all his energy into writing and performing. His body odor couldn't be ignored. It was, to him, a true part of the blues experience. In 1955, at a small club in Mississippi, he showed up wearing the same sweat-soaked shirt from the night before. The smell was so strong that customers near the bar asked to be moved. The bartender still vividly remembers the moment and called it a true blues memory. Muddy just laughed and said, "Blues don't need to be clean, it needs to be real." That quote became his unofficial motto. Sweat, road dust, and cigarette smoke weren't just byproducts of performing, they were essential ingredients in the bloodstream of blues he poured into every note. To many, Muddy's smell wasn't just odor, it was the scent of truth, for those willing to live raw, endure, and breathe in every beat of life. Muddy Waters, with his unwashed body and unfiltered soul, was living proof. Screaming Jay Hawkins, a towering icon of 1950s blues and rock and roll, was known for his haunting performances, eerie vocals, and stage entrances that sent chills down spines. His hit, I Put a Spell on You, cemented an unmistakable legacy in music history. But behind the glittering stage lights lay a secret more unsettling than anything he performed, a secret that came with a smell. In 1957, during a show in New Orleans, the suffocating atmosphere wasn't caused by a packed crowd, but by the overwhelming odor surrounding Jay. Bandmates and crew constantly complained about his body odor. Jay could go days without bathing. He believed that his funk made his haunted persona in I Put a Spell on You even more convincing. But this smell wasn't just bad, it was infamous. They called it gasoline-soaked mummy, a mix of sweat-cheap cologne and something utterly indescribable. Some joked that standing next to Jay felt like standing beside a smoldering fire releasing toxic fumes. And it didn't stop there. Before one show, a panicked crew member sprayed deodorizer all over the stage curtains just to stop the deadly scent from spreading. Studios and stages felt under siege. From the ghastly smell, only Jay could produce a stench that followed him from backstage to the booth, woven tightly into the image of his voodoo king persona. Jay never avoided it, never toned it down. He would burst out laughing, call it his magic scent, and say that anyone who couldn't handle it simply didn't understand real art. That bizarre odor became a part of his brand, fueling his music and leaving audiences both horrified and hypnotized. Many believed the infamous mummy smell wasn't just an odd habit, but a psychological tactic, a way to summon a supernatural atmosphere that drew fans in like a spell. His refusal to bathe the cheap cologne and that bizarre mummy smell didn't just drive people away. They were exactly what gave Screaming Jay Hawkins his eerie magnetic mystique. He lived in his own world where music and scent blended into unforgettable performances. In the 1950s, an era when eccentric artists were often met with suspicion, Jay shattered every norm with an extreme style that stunned the world. That's why Screaming Jay Hawkins wasn't just a music legend. He was a symbol of defiance, wild artistry, and at times, pure terror. That grotesque odor, while it pushed people back, became the secret ingredient in a one-of-a-kind legend. John Lee Hooker, the blues legend, with a voice so rich it pulled listeners into another world, captivated not just with his music, but with an almost obsessive attachment to an old leather jacket he wore through countless tours, starting in the 60s. His songs carried the weight of endless sorrow, and that jacket became a symbol of that spirit. In 1963, during a tour in California, people began to notice that Hooker's vibe wasn't just musical. The leather jacket, worn non-stop for 2 weeks, was soaked in road dust, sweat, and whiskey like a secret weapon he carried everywhere. The band said the smell of that jacket was unforgettable. A thick cloud that made anyone nearby instinctively step back. It wasn't just regular body odor, it was a fierce blend that made you feel like you were standing in a haunted, rundown bar. It was the scent of a life lived on the road, all in, soaked in pure blues. Hooker put it bluntly, "This jacket holds my soul, wash it, and you kill the blues." That coat carried stories of endless journeys, trembling notes, and the scars of a hard-lived life. You could say the stench on Hooker's clothes was inseparable from his music. It let him live and breathe every note. Washing it to him would be like rinsing away his soul. One night at a bar in Oakland, when he played his guitar a little too close to the crowd, people in the front row had to step back from the overwhelming smell. A fan joked that the scent could raise the dead. Strangely enough, no one ever denied Hooker's power, no matter how strong the funk. That odor carried exhaustion, bitterness, and a mysterious energy that flowed through every string he touched. His sly, knowing smile said it all. Hooker didn't care about judgment. For him, music and the soul soaked into that jacket were everything. No matter how foul, rough, or unforgiving that truth was, fans didn't just remember John Lee Hooker's songs, they remembered the feeling that he carried an entire life in every stain and unforgettable scent. That's blues raw, honest, instinctive, and eternal. John Lee Hooker and his old leather jacket became symbols of an unyielding era, a spirit of music meant not just to be heard, but felt with every sense. So what do you think about John Lee Hooker's way of life? If you feel it was the right choice, drop a comment with number 2. If you've got a different take, don't hesitate to share it with number 5. We're looking forward to hearing your unique perspective. Fats Waller, the jazz icon, piano genius, and soul of Harlem's blazing 1930s parties, brought music so alive it set crowds on fire and made his name soar. But behind the spotlight was a man bound to endless sleepless nights soaked in booze and smoke. In 1939, during a performance in Chicago, Fats's smell became legendary. A trombone player in his band recalled that standing near Fats felt like having the air stolen from your lungs, a heavy cloud of gin, half-burnt cigarettes, and thick sweat wrapped around every breath. It wasn't just body odor, it was like a roaming bar clinging to him, spreading out and erasing any safe space to breathe. That trombone player had to stand a full meter away, not out of dislike for Fats, but because of the bizarre, overwhelming odor that clung to him. But to Waller, there was nothing shameful about it. On the contrary, he saw that smell as proof of a life lived to the fullest. He often said, "This smell is proof I lived hard, no regular baths soaked in booze, cigarettes, and a burning passion for jazz." Fats crafted the image of a wild artist, unfiltered, untamed, and totally unconcerned with being clean. His funk became part of his identity, keeping his music raw, alive, and real to the bone. Once, when a patron at a small Harlem club complained about the smell wafting from the stage, Fats didn't get angry. Instead, he turned it into a performance. He slammed his hands on the piano and improvised a tune on the spot called "Ode to My Odor," a song for his own scent, a moment that was both hilarious and defiantly bold. The whole room erupted in laughter, stunned that someone could be so unapologetically confident as to turn his own stench into music. That smell of gin smoke and sweat might have pushed people away, but it also stood as a symbol of Fats Waller's life, lived to the fullest, fierce, intoxicating, and steeped in music. People didn't just remember him for his talent, they remembered his defiance, his difference, a man who lived like a blazing party until the very end. That strange body odor left a mark on anyone who ever saw him perform. Fats Waller didn't just play music, he lived inside it. And that wild, unforgettable funk became part of his legend, a one-of-a-kind harmony of booze, sweat, madness, and genius. Ike Turner, the genius behind the success of the Ike and Tina Turner Revue, was a soul and rock legend who crafted countless unforgettable hits. But behind the stage lights lay a heavy darkness, a story drenched in addiction chaos and a horrifying stench few dared to speak of. In the 1970s, as drugs consumed his life, Ike didn't just lose himself, he pulled everyone around him into the spiral. In 1974, at a recording studio in Los Angeles, The air turned suffocating the moment Ike walked in. Even the seasoned sound engineers used to eccentric, high-maintenance stars shook their heads. Ike's body odor was unlike anything human. It felt like standing in an abandoned chemical plant, a chilling blend of sweat, cigarette smoke, and a thick layer of opium that clung to his skin and clothes. His sweat-soaked outfit made the room so stifling that the crew had to fling the windows wide open despite the freezing winter air. No one could escape the overwhelming discomfort. Studio staff had no choice but to wear masks. Some even brought in industrial fans to push back the stench. One producer showed up with an essential oil diffuser not to relax, but to keep the entire room from passing out. But Ike didn't care. Glued to his guitar, lost in his addiction, he dove headfirst into marathon writing sessions. He even bragged, "This smell is my power, the scent of a genius in hell." The brutal truth. That odor wasn't just from skipped showers or too much booze. It was the echo of a soul unraveling the scent of a brilliant artist buried in addiction and darkness. Hoes who worked with Ike recalled that as unbearable as his stench was, they couldn't help but be drawn into the music he created, a kind of raw, heavy art drenched in shadow. That suffocating smell became an inseparable part of the tragic portrait of a genius spiraling downward. Studio staff had no choice but to wear masks or crank industrial fans at full blast to push the stench out. One producer even brought in an essential oil diffuser just to rescue the room, trying to keep people from passing out under the weight of the overwhelming odor. But Ike couldn't have cared less. He stayed glued to his guitar, completely consumed by addiction and marathon songwriting sessions that stretched for hours. He proudly declared, "This smell is the price of genius. You people just don't get it." As if it were a badge of honor, a weapon in his haunted war for musical expression. In those years, Ike was like a ghost, drifting through recording studios, unwashed, detached, and wrapped in a toxic cocktail of cigarette smoke, hard liquor, and opium residue so deeply embedded in him that no amount of soap could ever scrub it away. He stayed up all night still wearing the same sweat-drenched clothes, and by morning the stench hadn't faded a bit. That smell became a stark reminder of an artist slowly destroying himself day by day. It wasn't just sweat or cigarette smoke, it was the scent of addiction, pain, and despair. Those who were around Ike during that time spoke of a discomfort laced with sorrow, witnessing a genius trapped in the darkness of his own making. That so-called scent of genius, as haunting as it was, couldn't save a soul sinking deeper into the abyss. Rick James, the king of funk in the 1980s, was not only famous for his music, but also for his wild lifestyle that no one could match. His album's street songs catapulted him to fame, but behind the stage lights was a wild scent stemming from endless partying. In 1981, during the Street Songs tour, the crew knew well that Rick had gone days without showering. At a show in Detroit, his body odor was a gloomy mix of sweat-hard liquor and half-burned cigarettes. Backstage was like a chaotic storm, with staff having to crank industrial fans to full blast. The sound was almost like an airplane engine, just to clear the air after Rick left the dressing room. And Rick didn't deny it. He bragged, saying, "That's real funk, raw and unfiltered. That smell keeps my wild energy intact." For him, not showering was the key to maintaining that explosive power in every performance. A small habit, but one that symbolized the wildness and tragedy behind the glow of a funk superstar. George Clinton, the heart of Parliament funkadelic, was the face of 70s funk, known for his outrageous style and cosmic creativity. Mothership Connection launched him and the band into another dimension, but it was his bizarre personal habits that truly left a lasting impression. In 1976, during a major tour, Clinton went an entire week without bathing because he believed it helped preserve the band's cosmic vibrations. His body odor became the stuff of nightmares, thick sweat, burnt cigarette smoke, and the stale chemical tang of dry shampoo, the only thing he used instead of bathing. The smell got so intense that band members had to wear masks during rehearsals in enclosed spaces. At a New York show, fans in the front row even thought the bizarre odor was part of the performance itself. Clinton didn't deny it. In fact, he joked that if his smell made you dizzy, it meant you were touching the real universe. A strange and uncomfortable habit, no doubt, but it was pure George Clinton living on his own terms, creating the image of a funk star who was as eccentric as he was magnetic. Flavor Flav, the unforgettable icon of Public Enemy, was known not just for his giant clock necklace, but for his explosive energy and eccentric style throughout the 1980s. The group's music shook the foundations of hip-hop, but behind the spotlight was a habit that made people squirm. In 1989, during a tour, fellow group members were often horrified by the fact that Flav wore the same dirty clothes for an entire week without washing them. Flavor Flav's body odor during a show in Los Angeles was described as something out of an abandoned gym, thick with sweat and grime. Things got so bad that Chuck D, the group's co-founder, had to secretly spray deodorizer on Flav before he hit the stage. After some VIP guests complained they couldn't handle it, Flav couldn't have cared less. He shouted, "That's the power of hip-hop, the secret weapon to own the stage." That eccentric habit only amplified his wild, unmistakable persona, making Flavor Flav's stench, a part of his brand, shocking but impossible to forget. Old Dirty Bastard, a standout member of Wu-Tang Clan, truly lived up to his name throughout the 1990s. His raw, unfiltered music made him unforgettable, but it was his smell that left the deepest impression on many. In 1995, while recording Return to the 36 Chambers, a studio engineer recalled ODB walking in like he'd just crawled out of a smoldering landfill. His ripped jeans and sweat-soaked hoodie, worn for an entire week, made the air in the Brooklyn studio feel thick and heavy, almost unbreathable. At one show, when ODB jumped down near the crowd, fans in the front row instantly covered their noses, too stunned to even react. That stench became part of his persona, with some fans calling it the hip-hop spell of the 90s. ODB turned his filthy habits into a statement, a raw, unforgettable rebellion that left a lasting mark on anyone who ever crossed his path. Tracy Morgan, the famously hilarious star, not only stood out for his talent, but also for his well-known habit of not bathing during much of the 2000s. While working on 30 Rock from 2006 to 2013, Tracy's aura became a running joke on set with his body odor, often making the crew visibly uncomfortable and turning into an unavoidable backstage legend. In 2009, at a rap party in New York, Tina Fey famously described Tracy Morgan's scent as a living ecosystem, a fusion of stubborn body odor and cheap cologne. This wasn't your average funk. Tracy's smell made people keep their distance, but he saw it as his secret weapon for locking in the perfect comedic rhythm. His wife even bought an air purifier just to deal with his unique aroma at home. Tracy Morgan's smell wasn't just a hygiene issue. It was part of his identity, the mark of an eccentric, unforgettable character and an essential piece of his one-of-a-kind style. Richard Pryor. The legendary American comedian was known not only for his brilliance on stage, but also for his wild lifestyle in the 1970s. He carried a distinct scent, a mix of drugs, booze, sweat, and sleepless nights. While filming Stir Crazy in the late 70s, Pryor reportedly went days without bathing. Crew members recalled him walking in straight from underground clubs, cigarette smoke clinging to his hair with clothes soaked in old sweat and the sharp sting of alcohol. In 1978, during a show in LA, he passed through the VIP section and left behind a smell so intense, one guest got up and left. Pryor's apartment wasn't any better. Ashtrays, overflowing clothes strewn everywhere, and air so thick with cigarette smoke and liquor it felt like breathing through a bar rag. Friends often brought candles and even wore masks just to endure a visit. His smell became an inseparable part of his world, a chaos so deeply ingrained it couldn't be scrubbed away. Backstage at a Wilson Pickett show, the air felt heavier than ever. Even the band members used to the wild energy of live gigs couldn't help but keep their distance, overwhelmed by Pickett's powerful body odor that made the space almost unbreathable. But Pickett didn't care in the slightest. He just chuckled and said, "If I didn't smell like that, I couldn't sing Mustang Sally with soul." To him, music wasn't just something you heard, it was something you felt, even smelled. That thick, gritty scent became an inseparable part of his sound, a symbol of his wild life, and a lasting imprint on every performance. For Wilson, Pickett soul wasn't just a genre, it was a living, breathing experience, an unapologetically raw presence that could be felt through every sense. His music didn't just touch hearts with each note, it filled the air, created an atmosphere thick with emotion, and carried his unmistakable, unforgettable scent. It was a fusion of sound and raw truth, a visceral energy you could only understand by being close by, living in rhythm with Wilson Pickett himself. That scent, though it may have made those around him uncomfortable, was an essential part of Pickett's identity, a powerful symbol of an artist who lived fully truthfully and unapologetically through his music. To him, smell wasn't something to erase, it was part of the music itself, and that's what made Wilson Pickett unmistakable, bold, raw, and unafraid to face the grit of life and of himself. His presence, like his voice, was undeniable, felt, heard, and even inhaled. Miles Davis, the jazz legend with an unmatched style, reshaped modern jazz with masterpieces like Kind of Blue and Bitches Brew. But by the late 1960s, his brilliance came at a steep personal cost, days and nights, consumed by isolation, addiction, and chaos. In 1969, during the recording of Bitches Brew, Miles rarely left the studio. He went days without bathing, and wore the same old black sweater, his body cloaked in the heavy atmosphere of genius under pressure. His scent, a potent mix of sweat, cigarettes, and booze, filled the closed studio space, making the air thick and hard to breathe. Sound engineers had to crack open windows in the dead of winter just to let some air in. But Miles didn't care. He was locked in with his trumpet playing, like every note came from deep within a crumbling soul, from the darkest corners of his being. Though the smell may have unsettled those nearby, the band members never complained. They whispered that the scent itself was part of the music, a dark, heavy undertone that somehow belonged. Perhaps that very smell of decay helped shape one of the greatest recordings in history. It wasn't just a sign of neglect or self-destruction, it was a reflection of the pain, the weight, and the deep sorrow inside the soul of a brilliant artist. The smell of Miles Davis wasn't just the scent of a man making music, it was the scent of a life that had walked through darkness, echoing his inner battles and personal struggle. And that very smell, however unpleasant, became an inseparable part of his greatness, a distinct imprint on the musical journey of a genius whose pain, brilliance, and truth could be felt in every breath of sound he created. Tracy Chapman, the soulful voice behind Fast Car, became a defining figure of 1980s folk with her raw, honest lyrics. Her debut album catapulted her to global fame, but behind those gentle melodies was a surprising, unforgettable reality few knew. In 1988, while recording her debut album at a Los Angeles studio, Tracy rarely changed clothes for days. She wore the same faded gray sweater every day with tangled hair, no makeup, no perfume, and no deodorant. The studio became steeped in the scent of body odor, old fabric, and dampness, like a quiet forest cabin left untouched. Air purifiers ran non-stop, and sound engineers had to crack open windows just to ease the stifling atmosphere. But Tracy didn't care. She was completely focused on the recording, unfazed by curious glances or quiet whispers around her. All that mattered to her was the music, and that for her was everything. Though the world may have judged and criticized her, Tracy stayed true to her path. They called her dirty, but she never changed. Tracy Chapman became a true icon and artist who lived by her own truth for the sake of music, not to please the crowd. It was that raw simplicity and unwavering authenticity that made her unlike anyone else, a musician who gave herself fully to her art, untouched by appearances or the weight of society's expectations. The untold stories of the stars behind the glamorous image of the celebrities we admire lie stories that have never been told. The stars you thought were flawless. Sometimes they left people breathless not from awe, but from their unforgettable scent. No one is perfect. And sometimes it's those strange, even dirty habits that make them feel more real than ever. But the question is, where's the line between genius and neglect? What do you think? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you found these stories fascinating, don't forget to hit subscribe, turn on notifications, and stay tuned for even more outrageous secrets in upcoming videos.